specific translation of a section from the original Hebrew. It's more graphic than found its way into the King James or NRSV.
Okay.
So we're recording this, we have to
What
be
is
careful
this?
what we say.
The Hebrew, the original Hebrew
Oh,
of Song of Solomon had a section that was much more graphic than what you find in any of our
in
translations.
modern English Bible.
Right.
This is a challenging one, so y'all gotta help me out.
Well, I was doing other things and again, didn't read it. I hadn't planned on coming.
I did not bring it because I figured that was more than we needed.
Oh,
To
the
know that
challenging part?
it's more graphic than we think is fine without reading out.
Probably.
I know, I see it, We just got back, we were up for the game,
I know, I'm just teasing you.
The Army Navy,
Yeah.
New York, came back this afternoon.
was it freezing?
You know, it was
Not as cold
like
as
low
normal?
sixties,
Oh,
but there was
that's
a lot
not
of
bad.
wind.
I've been there, Peter and I went a couple of times when I swear it was in the 20s, 30s. I thought it was
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
freeze to
I mean, it
death.
was incredibly warm for New York in December.
Yes,
It
definitely.
really was.
Yeah.
Actually, we went once on the official party
Uh-huh.
and.
Got to go in the
we
warming
got- we
room.
had Warming rooms,
Great.
snacks and all
Hi,
that.
Fred.
Hello. Hi there.
Well, Navy just outplayed them. I mean, they did. That's bottom line.
That's
They did.
Navy for you.
Uh-oh.
Statistics, the statistics
See
show.
my call on you tonight.
She and Bob can sit on that side.
Bob's already disgraced himself.
I know. Army did well first half, second half crumbled.
Well, the play calling I thought was really poor.
I
mean,
didn't sit
they
down
just-
and actually watch it. I just.
They got
was in
out
and
coached. They got out, you should see the old grad social media. Oh my God.
Go really,
Right.
They're all,
not happy.
no,
We've been the same, we see it every time
for
too.
sure. But it's fun to be up there. And the whole event is so patriotic.
Oh, yeah.
It really is.
That's
Mhm.
true.
And I said Lee Greenwood was up there singing,
God bless.
Oh,
God
Lee
bless the
Greenwood, that's
USA.
good.
Who was?
God bless the
Lee
USA.
Greenwood.
Lee Greenwood.
halftime,
Yeah,
but you know,
I just watched the second half, so I didn't see that.
You saw the Navy part.
Of course,
Army was better first half.
that's because he thought they would be losing. so bad.
Yeah, maybe.
I did, I gotta admit that. I was kind of afraid to turn it on.
Peter's sister is retired Navy JAG, and his brother-in-law is retired Marine or former Marine, as they say. Anyway, so they always harass him when Navy wins. He harasses them if and when Army
Either
wins.
one of them.
I harass them anyway.
Either one of them graduates.
No,
Basically went to Wellesley and Stanford. And Gary went to University of Idaho.
Yeah.
In Moscow.
yeah.
Yes, I was in there.
We didn't call Jamie. He is a West Point grad and he was very disappointed, I'm
I don't
sure.
talk to
He
Jamie.
used to get mad.
If
Oh, what
Dallas
happened
loses
today?
Or the Redskins lose. I
Yeah,
don't talk to him.
what
Day.
happened? Well, he doesn't like the Redskins. He likes the Cowboys.
I mean, if the
Who,
Cowboys
is the
lose,
game still
yes.
going on now, or is it
was-
over?
It was in the fourth
They
quarter.
lost.
They're
Who
losing
lost?
27-8
Redskins?
last I heard.
Oh, good. Jamie will be happy then. He likes the Cowboys. I wasn't
Talk
sure
to
if
him.
he-
I'm sorry?
I said, I'll talk to him.
Oh, no. You know, doesn't sound good. Oh, over here in the extra chair, there's some leftover snacks from this morning. I was hungry, so I went to the
How'd
kitchen,
you get yourself here?
grabbed a couple of things. Pete brought them.
Oh, that was very nice.
So now you have to either write down or just be real quiet.
I'll be real quick,
I'm gonna
because I
stay.
don't smell well, so trying to read my writing and
I have
understand.
to leave home at 6.
Hope we're done then.
Dinner's on the table.
You don't get it, you don't get it. huh?
That's right.
All right.
Dinner, what's that? What's dinner?
No, I don't, sweetheart.
It's self-service?
Oh, stop.
No. She's cooking salmon, so that's one of my favorite things in the whole
Oh,
world.
I wish Peter, he hates salmon. I love it. It's my
I
favorite.
don't hate it. But it's-
Fred, is Lois there? She bailed.
You're muted, Fred.
She's here, but she's looking for her phone.
Ah, okay. Hold it. If it's on, it'll ring. That's what we do.
You know, we signed in.
It hides every now and then.
We signed in with the church conference, Karen had to sign in without a video, because at 9 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah, we didn't.
she didn't want anybody to see her image at 9 o'clock in the morning. So we kept just Peter and Karen on the screen.
I noticed.
Oh, yeah.
You don't see them.
I put you both down as attending.
Right.
I know. They can
We were there,
eat
but she wouldn't let anybody
And
see
there's
her.
a thing about giving them something that's big, one of them just on it or something. I don't know, whatever. As long as you watch them and they don't have a recording episode, I guess anything's fine. So, whatever.
I have great expectations from you for this, Steve.
Oh, please don't. Please don't. My head is still halfway between here and New York City.
Oh, okay. Did you spend the night last night?
Yeah.
How was traffic?
Cost you about $1,000.
Bad?
Traffic today was great until we get to the good old Beltway,
Of course,
and then it was a mess.
yeah.
It never fails.
CC's always like.
Did you come around on the Wilson Bridge or the other side?
No, the other way.
Yeah.
That's how it directed us, you know, the Google lady, maps
Yeah, the
lady.
problem is you gotta
telling
go
us.
past Tyson's.
Yeah. Was
Yeah,
that where
that's
it was
where the
bad?
bottom
Well, there was
was.
shopping there. of course.
Actually, normally we would go over the Wilson,
Yeah,
but she directed us the other way, and then I turned on the traffic report and found out there was some gigalindo accident
oh, lovely.
going the Wilson way. So
That's why she took you.
she's smart. You have to
That's
listen to her.
Yeah.
Don't challenge her.
We were on a trip once and following Karen's Google lady,
Yeah.
and she had it in Spanish.
Oh,
She
I
had
did.
no idea how
Couldn't
she had
figure out what
triggered
happened.
Spanish.
She spoke Spanish.
And
I
we're
said,
getting
what?
directions in Spanish.
So I finally got it off of that. And then Peter had his car one time and no tolls. So it kept taking us these little roads in the middle of nowhere. It's weird.
And then Anderson had Mr. T talk to him, so he took right fool.
Oh, that's cute. I guess we're almost time.
all right, so let's see, Fred and Lois are the only two we have out in the Zoom world tonight, is that right?
Yeah.
Looks like,
That's what it looks like.
okay. Hey, Lois,
Did you guys get a new camera? Fred looks so younger, so much younger.
No, but you need new glasses.
Oh, you guys look great. Oh, here comes Pat.
oh, there she is.
Doing it on Zoom. Okay, cool.
Hey, Pat,
Hey.
I was afraid you had abandoned us tonight.
No, 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 no.
Okay, all right.
This is about as punctual as I get.
All right.
Okay, well, we probably have everybody we're gonna have, I guess, so, we'll go ahead and get started. Let me just open us in prayer. Dear Lord Jesus, we thank you for bringing us together here again this week in safety and peace and good health. We pray that you are here among us today as we meditate on your word and you help us to better understand what you would have us take away from this book, Song of Songs, and how we can grow our faith. Thank you for being with us. Amen. All right, so tonight we have, it's kind of a two-part class, I think. We'll kind of see how it goes. But the first part, we're gonna talk about Song of Songs, which is the last of the 5 wisdom books in this series. And I don't know that it's gonna be a full hour of discussion on that book. It may be, if it is, that's great. But if we conclude that a little bit early, then just as kind of a wrap up on the wisdom books, I'd like to take a few minutes for us to collectively sort of think through what we've taken away from the wisdom books. What it has told us basically that we can apply to our faith, any way in which parts of the wisdom books have challenged us in some way. And so just at the end, perhaps a little summary and wrap up. So we're going to get started here with this book, and those who arrived here, I told them, y'all got to help me with this one because this is a little bit of a challenge for me. Part of the challenge of it is the storyline, if you try to read it, I think is very disjointed. It doesn't follow a natural progression, and sometimes it's not even clear who's doing the talking in here. But I think we can work through that. And I think, as I said in my email earlier this week, I don't think it's really about the story. It's about the message that's coming through from the story. So why is it called Song of Songs? It's also called Solomon's Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, but we're going to call it Song of Songs. And the reason for that is because apparently in the Hebrew language, there is no way to express the superlative with a word such as the best, the greatest, the most wonderful. So Song of Songs would mean this is the greatest of all songs ever written. And we actually see that in some other parts of the Bible, though, too. In the New Testament, in Timothy, for example, there's reference to God of gods, King of kings, Lord of lords. So this is just simply a way for, in the Hebrew language, to talk about the best of
Holy of Holies.
something, the Holy of Holies, right? So what do we have here? Well, in brief, this is a sensuous love poem about passion and power of love between a young man and a young woman in a monogamous relationship, probably a marriage or to become a marriage. It's not really clear whether they're married or not, in my view. But it's a very, I think, unique book in the Old Testament and a unique book in the Wisdom series. First, because there is no mention of God anywhere in this book, no mention of God. Now, there's only one other book in the whole Bible that doesn't mention God. Does anybody know what that is? Thank you, Pete.
You asked.
You mean to say everybody except Peter.
Yeah, this and the book of Esther, the only two that don't mention God. But furthermore, there's no really overt theology being professed here. It's not necessarily a study in wisdom. It's not talking about God, God's relationship with human beings. It's just simply a really sensuous love story. Now, we can argue that there is a theology that's coming out of that that's not necessarily overt. And in fact, there have been numerous interpretations of what this book actually means. So we'll talk about those interpretations as we go forward. And then I'll tell you which one is the correct interpretation.
Glad we've got a specific angle.
All right, so there was actually there was a lot of debate among the rabbis who were assembling the Jewish canon about whether this book should even be included in there. And I think part of the problem they had with it was the nature of the language in here, very sensuous language, which in modern terms may not appear to be so sensuous to us today, but in ancient terms, with the desire, the man and the woman desiring each other and the descriptions of the human body, that was a pretty erotic piece of work. And so the rabbis were in a debate as to whether this should actually be included in the canon. There was one very influential figure, first century Jewish scholar and sage, Rabbi Akiva, actually was initially concerned. He forbade its use in celebration, saying, quote, "He who sings the Song of Songs in wine taverns, treating it as if it were vulgar or sexual, forfeits his share in the world to come." Ooh. So, don't sing this in a bawdy fashion in a tavern when you're drunk, because you're going to lose your salvation. But then later on, he actually defended it. And he said, "For all of eternity in its entirety is not as worthy as the day on which Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy. Song of Songs is the holy of holies."
Oh, interesting.
So he didn't want it to be used in a sort of a lascivious manner, but he had great respect and thought it was an important piece of work. And he had a certain interpretation of what the book meant that allowed him to celebrate it, I think, and that's probably not the interpretation that modern scholars have, but we'll get into that later. All right, so who was the author?
Solomon, I
Unknown,
think, unknown.
several authors.
We don't know. Again, the answer is
Always.
we don't
We don't
know,
know
right?
anything. I don't
That's right, we don't.
think. We're
The
just-
traditional view is that this is the work of King Solomon. And in fact, he is mentioned in the superscription here. I mean, it's called Solomon's Song of Songs. As we know, he did write 3,000 Proverbs and 1,005 songs. And as a man who had 300 wives and 700 concubines, I guess he knew something about love.
He was very
Or
tired.
maybe he
Or
didn't.
nothing
It
about it.
depends
He knew
on how
nothing.
you want to look at it.
I know nothing.
But he was a little preoccupied,
Yeah.
I think, with love. Let's leave it at that. He is mentioned 10 times in the text, but he's not really a main character in here, in my view. I don't think he's a main character. He's referred to in here, but it's a little hard to understand what his role is in this text. There is a counter argument, though, as scholars tend to do, that no, this was not the work of Solomon, that, the language in here points to having been written in the 3rd century BC, which would have been well after Solomon's time on earth. The vocabulary, morphology, syntax, and parallels to Egyptian and Mesopotamian love poetry in the first half of the millennium BC point to a date centuries after Solomon. So,
And Greek loanwords and Persian loanwords, both of which would not have been in Solomon's vocabulary.
right. But yet another scholar looked at the language debate and basically concluded the language is ambiguous. We can't tell. Basically, we can't tell. So all we know is it was written, if Solomon wrote it himself, then it was 900 and something BC, all the way up to probably not later than the 2nd century BC. All right, so the storyline, who are the main characters? They're really, in my view, and if you disagree with me, jump in there. I welcome that, but this is just my read, and as I said up front, it was a difficult read, challenging, I think, to try to figure out the plot here exactly. But there are, I think, clearly 2 main characters here. One is referred to as the beloved, and the other is the lover. So the beloved is a very young maiden whose father has apparently died. And her brothers, her mean brothers, have forced her to go out and work in the vineyards and harvest grapes or whatever. And she's been working and laboring out there so long that she talks about in the 1st chapter here how dark her skin is. She says, "Do not stare at me because I'm dark, because I'm darkened by the sun. My mother's sons were angry with me and made me take care of the vineyards. But then interesting, my own vineyard I have neglected." So she neglected herself and had to work really hard. So she was a poor girl working out there, yet she was exquisitely beautiful, as the text lays out. Not just in descriptions of her by her lover, but also in basically what other vague figures like the friends had to say about her. So she's a very beautiful young woman. Some believe that if Solomon wrote this, then this is really a story about his love for her and her love for him. And there is speculation that a female character in 1 Kings by the name of Abishag, the Shunammite, now this woman is referred to as the Shulamite. In 1 Kings, we find an Abishag, the Shunammite, so very close, could be the same. Abishag was brought in, she was said to be a beautiful young woman who was brought in to keep the aging King David warm at night.
Oh, right.
Before he
Remember
died.
that.
No, there was no hanky-panky.
No. She literally kept him warm.
Yes, but
She was the
He
heater.
was beyond hanky-panky.
Yeah, way beyond that. Yes.
Okay.
He was just cold.
right. So then
It's
she
just
became a central figure in the power struggle between Solomon's 2 sons, Adonijah and between David's 2 sons, I'm sorry, Adonijah and Solomon. Adonijah had lost the power struggle for the throne, even though he was the older of the 2 sons, and appealed to Bathsheba, his mother, to allow him to marry Abishag. And the reason for that apparently was that were he able to marry her, and she had been the caregiver for David, King David, that would have basically transferred the throne over to him. People would have insisted that he have the throne. And then Solomon found out about this. He found out about this little maneuver that Adonijah had made and had his brother murdered. So he was out of the way. Solomon went on,
Took care of
continued
that.
to be king. So anyway, that's Abishag. Some people read this as a love story between Solomon and a woman. I personally did not read it that way. I don't think that's an accurate interpretation, but if anybody disagrees, that's fine. Please, we can talk about that. The other person in here is, the other main character is the lover. And the lover is just, all we know about him is he's a young shepherd boy. That's virtually all we know about him. And that he's apparently very handsome, very virile. And the two of them are clearly smitten with each other. Now, there's some language in here from the lover that appears, you could interpret it as coming from Solomon, because it refers to the king, et cetera, et cetera. But others have argued that the reference to the king is not specifically to Solomon. That's a term of endearment that the maiden uses when she's referring to this shepherd boy who she loves. So it's a little unclear. So those are the two main characters in the book. Solomon is referred to in here when he comes swooping along in his entourage and she's out working the vineyards one day. But he doesn't really have a speaking role in here, I don't think. And again, it's not clear to me reading this, and I'm a little befuddled, as I said, but it's not clear to me reading this what Solomon's place in this is. Because really, I think this is a story about the love between the maiden and the shepherd boy, the two of them. Some scholars believe that perhaps the reference to Solomon and his entourage having come through the desert and seen her was really just a metaphor for the rich and wealthy class of men or royalty in that era, who basically thought they were entitled and could have anything they want. So again, there it's a little unclear. Anybody have any thoughts? Do you think, is this about Solomon and the maiden or not? And if not, then what's Solomon's place in this whole story?
I don't see him. I don't see him in it.
Not.
Solomon is symbolic, metaphorical. It's a reference.
Is there any way that this alludes to Israel, God
Well,
relationship?
we're gonna get there.
There is an
Don't steal my thunder, Bob. Don't steal my
There
thunder.
is an
It always
interpretation.
leads
You can
to something.
imagine, any book like this must have 6 or 8 interpretations that people have looked at. And because it is so, I dislike the book intensely. Because it is so out of place with the rest of the Old Testament. Once it was in the Old Testament, people felt compelled to find a reason why, and felt compelled to find metaphorical relationships and
Why was
analogous
it there? It
relationships.
must be deeper than it looks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. If this is a love story, what is it doing in the Old Testament? Well, it's more than a love story.
There's another argument against the Solomon theory, and that is that, this story really, if you read it, it really seems to be coming from the female perspective. It has a very
Yeah.
strongly
I
feminine
think so.
overtone to it. Unlikely to have that were Solomon the author, but it also puts the beloved and her lover on the same level. They're equals with each other, which really we haven't seen that in the Old Testament before, as we talked about how paternalistic it is and how women were wives or daughters were conceived of as property of the man, right? But here in this case, they are equal. And the woman is very unabashed and unashamed about how much she loves this young man. She's very straightforward. She doesn't hold back about it. She feels empowered. And so, the fact that they're on the same plane, it's entirely different from what we've seen in the previous books, in the wisdom books, where that's just simply not the case. So
You can walk that back to the concubine era that Solomon had.
Mhm.
And you have to conceive that one of his 300 concubines would love Solomon. What would Solomon have done with all of that many women in the harem who probably never see him at all, if not for some carnal relationship, how would they develop a sense of deep and abiding love that this book reflects?
Okay, so here is one interpretation of the plot. I read one book that had this basic general interpretation. So the maiden and the shepherd are in love with each other. Solomon comes along with his entourage, I think it's in chapter 3 or 4, his retinue through the desert, and attempts to dazzle the maiden. And he's smitten with her. He looks out, she's so beautiful, she stands out in this vineyard. And he's smitten with her, and of course wants to bring her into his harem. So she's dazzled a little bit, and she might have ended up in the court for a brief, his court, Solomon's court, for a brief period of time, but yet she's still thinking about the shepherd boy who was her true love. And she ultimately resists the king and stays with the shepherd, or goes off with the shepherd. That's just one of the interpretations of this story that are out there. But I tend to go along with, I think, what Pete was talking about, how Solomon here is just a kind of a metaphor. And this is really just a very basic love story between a young man and a young woman.
What did people think about the way this thing's written? About the language?
Yeah.
Is it just
When
whatever
was
it's
it written?
translated?
Who would have written it?
I mean, does it make sense? I mean, is this one?
Was this translated from the Greek? Or from Hebrew?
Depends on your translation, but the Greek was translated from the Hebrew initially, because
Right,
it was written in Hebrew.
that's what it was written in Hebrew.
written in Hebrew.
Because it's Old Testament, right?
Um,
Okay,
But hey, your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn ewes.
I know. Your
Your
hair is
teeth are like
like
female sheep.
your hair is like a flock of goats. Some of this.
But you
is
know
not-
what, all right, think about that though,
Not
in the
looks
ancient
good.
context though,
Doesn't sound good.
okay? Talking about her hair like a flock of goats, I mean, that's not something we would say to any woman we were trying to impress
No,
today,
I don't
think.
think so.
I don't know, maybe Bob would, he's native.
What can I say? We're distorted.
You goats, right?
That's right, we're goats.
But so
Lots are
the
like-
shepherd here who's stating these words, actually, this is in chapter 4. How
Right,
beautiful you
right.
are, my darling. How beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your hair is like a flock of goats.
That's
Your teeth a flock of sheep. Each has its twin, not one of them is alone. What he's, yeah, apparently in ancient writings of that time, they did use a lot of metaphors to nature for human beings.
You ever seen a pomegranate sliced?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to look
Got
like
lots of
that.
seeds.
All those
And
little
it
red
says
dots.
Your temples are like a slice. of
But not to belabor this too
Too
long here, but
Fun to belabor.
a flock of goats,
That's all it
okay,
means.
he's a shepherd, right? Goats are his livelihood. This is
Okay,
his
so they're
thing.
beautiful. to
And
him.
so looking at, he's picturing these herd of goats coming down this mountain and they're moving and just like, you know,
He
she's
likes-
maybe turning her head. and
He
her
likes
hair's-
his goats too much.
He likes his goats. And
Neck is like
the
a Tower of David.
teeth, let me finish. The teeth are white like sheep. Why is that a big deal? What do you think dental hygiene was like back
Not
in
good.
those days?
They had yellow teeth.
Here's a young woman who has perfect teeth. They're white. And it says, each has its twin, not one of them is alone. So
In
she's
other
not
words,
missing
she's not
anything.
missing
She got
teeth.
all her teeth and they're all white, right? She's beautiful.
Thank
So this
praise.
is, you know, this stuff sounds crazy to us today. But
The breasts are like two fawns.
what does that suggest
They don't.
about her age?
She's
No,
young.
She's a young girl, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe an early teenager, you know?
Yeah, maybe pedophilia.
So
They did start early back then.
They did.
So is this really just kind of an expression of true human reaction and love and human nature?
And Lois just said she's not from West Virginia because she has all her teeth.
Nice.
Well,
And I'm wondering if, when your wife calls you an old goat, is that a term of endearment?
well, she also, she goes on to describe her
Like apples.
shepherd in chapter 5, starting with verse 10. Not going to read the whole thing, but my lover is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. Eyes like doves, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. Cheeks are like beds of spice, yielding perfume. On and on and on and on. So this is really, I mean, I'm sure reading this as Hebrew poetry back in the day, this was quite a stunning piece of work here, right? But you know, what's coming through again, I think, is, I mean, forget this, what sounds like such silly terminology to us today, but it's the passion here for each other, right? They're just totally taken,
Isn't that
infatuated
fairly
with each other.
typical of young love?
Yeah,
Yes.
well, they were also, back then, they didn't marry for love. They were given in marriage by their fathers, the girls, most
Or sold.
or sold. So this is kind of a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, I guess, isn't it?
Or for political expediency.
Right.
Yes,
To,
right,
Which is why Solomon had all those
Yeah.
wives.
yeah. So this was unusual.
So looking at their
Usually
relationship
hidden.
just a little bit more and trying to glean what we can here, reading between leaves. There is, I think, the couple has been chaste up to this point. We're not sure what that point is, but if you look at chapter 4, verse 12, he is talking about her saying, "You are a garden locked up, my sister, my bride, locked up. You are a spring enclosed, a sealed fountain." So she was a virgin, apparently, which was held in high esteem by him and the culture at that time. But then there are also references in here, a number of references to, veiled references maybe, to intimacy, actual sexual intimacy between the two. So in chapter 4, verse 16, she is saying, "Let my lover come into his garden and taste its choice fruits."
I skipped right over that. I skipped right over that part.
That's hot. Huh? All right.
Okay, that's back to the
Um,
pomegranates.
In chapter 6, verse 3, "I am my lover's and my lover is mine.
Yeah.
He browses among the lilies." The lilies are her body, basically,
I guess,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, let's see, one more.
Go to the
At
vineyard.
least you got the best of drawings.
Well, I'm not gonna pursue it.
Oh,
Well, in the Jewish tradition, the man would, propose to the woman, and just with that proposal, they were assumed to be married.
Yeah.
Even though they weren't
Betrothed,
living
that's correct. They
together.
were betrothed.
They
Yeah.
usually were apart for at least a year because he had to build the house for her that, they were going to live in. And she's waiting for him to hurry up and finish getting that job done and come and get her.
Sex among the betrothed was legitimate.
And then the last reference was in the first chapter. No, I'm sorry, second chapter. First. No, I'm sorry, pardon me. First chapter. Verse 16, she is saying, "How handsome you are, my lover. Oh, how charming, and our bed is verdant." So their bed is in the fields, right? You get this whole very simple lifestyle here that they're overjoyed to have. They're two peasants, basically. And Solomon and all his wonders don't really rock her the way this guy does, right? So that's part of the text. There's one line that appears in here, I think, 3 different times, where she says, "Do not arouse or awaken love
Right.
until it so desires."
Yeah.
What is that supposed to mean? And why, if it's repeated 3 times, we know in Hebrew poetry, repetition is used to make a point.
Yeah.
So what's the point? Do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. I read it, I don't know if I'm right, I could be wrong, but if she were in a position where people were saying to her, "My gosh, the king wants you, you can have the king," she's saying, "No, don't arouse or awaken love until it so desires." In other words, like,
Oh, okay.
maybe, I don't know,
Maybe.
again,
That's an interesting interpretation.
It also will be that she says, "We're not gonna have sex yet. Back off, Romeo."
But then before we get into the significance of this, the main part in here is chapter 8, verses 6 and 7. or this is her discussion of the importance of what love is. Place me like a seal over your heart, she says to her lover, like a seal on your arm, for love is as strong as death, its jealousy unyielding as the grave. It burns like blazing fire, like a mighty flame. Many waters cannot quench love, rivers cannot wash it away. If one were to give all the wealth of his house for love, it would be utterly unscorned. So really, this would seem to be a celebration of love and the importance of love, right? In the context of this particular story, though, largely love between a man and a woman. I guess you could conclude that by saying sort of love conquers all. But one scholar that I was reading says it's not just love conquers all, but it can come with a price. And the allusion there to the price in this version was, she talks in here later about her pain and agony when she woke up and her lover was gone and she couldn't find him. And so she rushes out into the streets and the night watchmen find her and they beat her, like, what are you doing out here? You know, love comes with some hardships as well. So that was that one interpretation. All right, so that's basically the story. Now, for the interpretations of the theology, there are three basic interpretations that I'm aware of for what this all means. So ancient scholars thought this language couldn't have a book about sex in the Bible. That would be just, no. So they interpreted this whole story not to be about intimacy between a man and a woman, but allegory for God's love of the Jewish nation.
Yeah.
That's how they interpreted it to be, this intense love for God and for his nation.
Any idea about the timing that theory came about or was developed?
I think it was early. I mean, like in the 1st, 2nd century AD, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
That was the view of ancient Jewish scholars. That's how they legitimized it. And I think that's why this one rabbi I referenced earlier said it's the song of greatest, the most wonderful, because it's this intense, incredible, amazing love of God for the Jewish people. Well, then in the Christian era, of course, this book was transferred into the Christian Bible in the Old Testament. But the early Christian sages back there, beginning, I guess, with someone named Origen of Alexandria, who lived 184 to 253 AD. They talked about how this is more Christ's love for his church and for his people. So basically taking the Jewish interpretation and applying it to Christianity and saying, no, this is really about Christ and the church. But various other interpretations came along later, including one that the bride, the maiden in here is actually the Virgin Mary. Not sure where that came from, but people were trying to justify this book's inclusion in the Bible. And, you know, they just had to have some deeper theology associated with it. Modern scholars, however, have come to a different conclusion. They throw out both of those two interpretations for the most part. And they say that this is simply a celebration of love between a man and a woman in a married or monogamous relationship. Plain and simple, that's what it is. But they also would point out that the love that they have in here also points toward a higher love that we have in Christ and Christ for us. So it's a little bit of kind of merging two different interpretations in there.
Actually, three, because it could also be the love of God for the Jews. And that doesn't, because we interpret it one way, doesn't mean that they can't interpret it the other way. Because there's no right or wrong. This is all how it
That's why
talks
they
to
call it
you.
interpretation.
Right. So, I mean, there's no reason why we can't interpret it as Christ's love, or they're interpreted as God's love, or it's just a love story. All of those things.
Let me pose a question. You keep saying, you've used the phrase several times, love between a man and a woman. Suppose we rephrase that and say the love between a boy and a girl. That's different.
Well, elaborate
Young
on that.
love.
Young love.
Yeah.
By that. I mean, this is not a 40-year-old woman and a 40-year-old man.
Or if you don't want to call a boy and a girl, maybe a young woman and a young man, or a adolescence or whatever. Yeah,
Of course, those terms all had different meaning. in
they
those
did,
days.
they did.
But why then would
Young
it be in the
people have a
Bible?
tendency
just
to
as a-
get wrapped
you
up
know?
in each other. And that's,
Would
that's
there-
what young love.
Well,
Would there be a book in the Bible just about teenage, like puppy love or infatuation? I don't think
I
so.
think
Not
this is-
infatuation. It's more a question of
13, 14.
they feel the deep feelings, but don't necessarily understand the ramifications, okay? They're
Yeah.
naive.
Sure.
And I mention that only because it ties back to the whole question of God's relationship with the Jewish people. In the sense that throughout the Old Testament, they're incredibly naive. They had just assumed this relationship. I mean, they didn't think that God would allow the Jerusalem to be destroyed.
For
Okay,
sure.
and, they just didn't get it. And, he sent all the prophets, and of course, they, as Jesus later says, you killed all the prophets. Okay, it's not quite true, but it's close enough. It's an immature people trying to deal with the creator of the universe.
But both of these are immature people in this book. But they don't appear to be.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that would, yeah, you're right. You're right.
Well, listen to this one. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just gonna go back. I asked a question earlier and where I was getting at is this is just an exploration of humans interacting with each other. Now, I've come across this chart that adds a little bit more context to this thing, and it's called Couples in Love in the Bible. And so there are other love stories that we read about. So in Genesis, you have Isaac and Rebekah. You have Jacob and Rachel. You have Boaz and Ruth. They talk here about Elkanah and Hannah. David and Michael. Michael was Saul's daughter, right? Solomon and the Shulamite. Hosea and Gomer. Now, that's another
Oh, that's
real
an incredible
different
story. Yeah.
approach to examining a relationship. And finally, Christ in the church, in this compendium, so in that context, this story is just another angle of looking at human love.
But this has a certain passion with it that I don't know you
Yeah.
find in those other
Right,
stories.
that's
This is
part of the
really a
difference.
passionate relationship.
Yeah, okay, and does it ring true? Is it a false passion, a false description, or do people really feel like that when they're young?
Karen would fall over laughing if I talked.
Yeah, but you're not 16 years old anymore.
No.
I have noticed that.
All right.
But when I was 19 or 20 and better, she still would have laughed at me.
Yeah. I would have a few
Let me
told
read
me.
to you a
She was
paragraph
wise.
here.
My hair looked like
Yeah, go ahead,
goats.
sorry, so that,
Let me read to you a paragraph I hear. This is in the Messiah Church Library, or it will be when we finish tonight. Back in the library, The Song of Solomon by G. Lloyd Carr. This is what he had to say, so just bear with me for a minute. A frequent Old Testament term for the sexual union of man and woman is the verb know, to know.
Yeah.
It is worthy of note that the most intimate knowledge of another person is not on the basis of intellectual exchange and the discussions of theological ideas, but in the intimate sexual union of male and female. In this light, it should not be considered obscene that at least one book of the Bible be dedicated to the celebration of one of the central realities of our creaturehood. The song does celebrate the dignity and purity of human love. This is a fact that has not always been sufficiently stressed. The song, therefore, is didactic and moral in its purpose. It comes to us in this world of sin, where lust and passion are on every hand, where fierce temptations assail us and try to turn us aside from the God-given standard of marriage. And it reminds us in a particularly beautiful fashion how pure and noble true love is.
Not bad.
What do you think?
I like it.
Especially when we consider that we're made in the image of God.
It did. I mean, how do we relate to this in light of our culture today? This book. I mean, if this book representative of God's ideal intention for human sexuality? Or would we just look at it today and say, ah, that was 2,000 years
Didn't he
ago?
say be fruitful and multiply?
Well, what you're saying is true.
Mhm.
I think it's intended that way. The problem is 2,000 years later, our sectarian society has gone well in a different direction.
Right.
And the sectarian society is leaning hard on the church. And parts of the church are changing to match society rather than a biblical track.
Mhm.
And that's a fact of life. Things that were banned once are not banned anymore.
Well, that's right. It's basically an anything goes culture that we live in today. The culture, I'm not talking necessarily about the church, the culture itself. And some parts of the church too, but. All right, well, any concluding thoughts on this? I think we probably beat this subject to death. But anything from Zoom, out in the Zoom world, any thoughts, comments, disagreements? No?
There'll be a quiz in 5 minutes.
I probably will never read this book again.
I wish I had contacted Megan and said, can you send me a copy of your
Yeah,
sermon?
that
on
would be-
this?" 'Cause the
she
only
still
time
has
I've-
Yeah, I'm sure she does.
Or she would remember her thoughts from it at least.
She interpreted as Christ in the church, right?
Yes.
Isn't that her
Yeah,
interpretation?
yeah,
That's the
I
only,
don't
we
know.
talk, this is the only sermon we can ever remember of Messiah
Ever in my
referencing this
life.
book.
Ever in my life in any church. have I
Yeah.
heard her preach.
I can't, I just don't remember what her final thoughts were on.
I vaguely remember it, but not clearly. It is, this book in the Jewish tradition, it is one of the 5 scrolls in the Megillah, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this book is read, or at least parts of it are read during the Passover, Feast of the Passover.
Just that,
And that's, again, God's love of the Jewish nation
I guess.
and how he delivered them from
Yeah.
slavery in Egypt, I guess, would be the context for that. So,
Remember, God, put us in the garden until we decided we were smarter than he was. And they were walking around naked.
I know people will still do that.
There's that too.
all right.
You're recording this.
Okay, so that's Song of Solomon. We made it through. So we've now made it through all 5 of the wisdom books. And at this point, I want to just stop and sort of take a look back at what we've talked about in this series. So just to refresh, I mean, we started with the book of Job, which is probably the hardest of the 5 books. And it was about suffering, but it was also about keeping your faith through the process of suffering and continuing to rely on God and being rewarded in the end for your suffering. Then we went into Psalms, which was basically 150 poems or songs on random subjects that appeal to all the different issues, I think, of human life, all the different sort of things that we can go through, and the emotions and the appeals to God. And there we see, the psalmist having a direct relationship with God, praying to God directly and expressing his emotions or his praise, his joy, his sadness, his sin. So a direct relationship there between the psalmist and God.
Even his anguish. like in
Anguish.
Psalm 22.
Right, his
My
anger,
my God.
right. And Psalms, as we know, is the most quoted book in the New Testament, so it's a hugely important book.
I'd venture to say it's the most popular book in the Christian church, the most popular Old Testament book in the Christian church.
Probably. And then to Proverbs, which is often paired with Psalms, but clearly is not the equal, I don't think, in terms of how often it's used or how passionate people can feel about it. But there in Proverbs, now this is something was written for, remember, young men on the verge of adulthood. And it's basically trying to teach them how to be wise going forward as a man and how to avoid some of the traps that they could fall into. But the wisdom that's in there is wisdom for godly living. It's applicable to everybody, male and female. But it's different in the sense that it's just a lot of folksy little sayings, and a lot of it is just kind of common sense that you would think. I mean, it's not deep on the emotional, spiritual passion that we might see in Psalms. Then we did Ecclesiastes, which was a dark night of the soul for the author, who basically felt that he had wasted his whole life trying to figure out God and the meaning of human life, and it had been a failure, and he didn't accomplish anything. And then Song of Songs, which some people think is a counterpoint to that book.
At least it's upbeat.
Yes, it's upbeat, and it follows right after. I don't think it does in the Tanakh, but it does in the Song of Song. Oh, it's right after Job in the Tanakh. Okay,
Well, that's,
interesting, similar. So those are the 5 wisdom books that we've been through. And again, to quote for just a moment, a little shorter reading here from Carr, who I thought this is really actually a pretty good book. It says, wisdom is a literary genre common throughout the ancient Near East, which shows many similar characteristics all across the region in various time periods. Wisdom is the closest thing to philosophy the ancient peoples had. For the most part, even though wisdom is not presented in carefully structured philosophical treatises like those of the ancient Greeks, the more homely literature of the ancient Near Eastern wisdom wrestles with the same basic philosophical questions. Where did I come from? Where am I going? What is the meaning of life? How is the universe ordered? Is there life after death? Can I know God? How? What is life all about? What is the nature of love? These are universal human questions, and it's not surprising that the ancient Hebrews found it necessary to address them. So, how well do you think the wisdom books have addressed these questions? And what are your takeaways? I'd be interested in knowing how you personally, what you take away from these books. If there's anything new that really grabbed you, that you thought was useful, or anything that you thought was challenging or you would dispense with, what's the impact of the wisdom books? Given that they're Old Testament, they're part of the Jewish tradition, so they don't know about Christ and his coming and everything that he taught, but for their time and what they preached, what do you think of them?
my favorite would be the Psalms
Mhm.
because of the broad range of subjects and just showing how people express themselves to God in prayer, whether in, like you said, in anguish and praise, whatever. It's just showing that you can talk to God and God listens. Ecclesiastes, my least favorite. I just don't need to go there. We've got too much darkness. Take it away.
Well, and you can yell at God too, just like in Job.
Yes.
God favored Job at the end, not his
That's
3
true.
friends who were
Yeah.
trying to be all
Now,
orthodox.
Job was a good study in human nature and man's relationship to God too.
Mhm.
Proverbs doesn't speak to me as much, but,
Mhm.
and I've never really read Song of Songs that much, but, I don't know that if I were to say yes or no to being in the Bible, I'm not sure I would say yes. But it's an upbeat, lovely piece of literature, but I'm not sure whether we're putting into it things that make it say it needs to be in the Bible. I don't know. Anyway, that's what I take.
What else?
Well, this stands out from the rest of the books of the Bible in my mind, because all the other books seem to be moving the story forward of the Jews from Genesis all the way. And even the New Testament does the same thing. It just, with all the letters of Paul and this, it always seems to be moving forward, but these don't move the historical story forward. There, as this reference book that I'm looking at here is just, these writings, this literature provided guidance for moral behavior and everyday living for the Jews. So it's just that they had a different purpose, not intended to be historical in nature, each one in its own way.
Yeah, it's as if, they called a timeout. They said, okay, we're going to stop on the historical context and, all right, let's just talk about theology for a little bit. But what do the wisdom books tell us about God, the nature of God and God's relationship with human
Very
beings?
intimate relationship. Very intimate.
You wouldn't get that from Ecclesiastes.
I say conflicting,
Yeah,
you give conflicting views of
they
that,
do.
all the way from Psalms, which I agree with Karen in her interpretation of Psalms, down to Ecclesiastes, which, as I said last time, life sucks. I mean, that's really not
That's
in
not
harmony with
positive.
the world that
Right.
you think of when you're trying to obey God. And I find the Song of Solomon off to the side.
Don't you think that part of the reason for that broad range that you just expressed is the fact that we keep forgetting how big God is? In other words, we're thinking in terms of dimensions that we understand. And we say the words that God is big, but just to understand what that means. Okay, and it's so beyond our ability to comprehend. That's one of the things that I thought about.
I agree with your interpretation, how it all fits together. I don't think that the decision to include those books in the Bible included that level of depth in its analysis.
I don't know about that.
I
I'm
mean,
only
that's just-
talking, I'm only
Yeah, no,
talking about
I see your point.
my faith journey.
Right, I see your point in that, and it makes good sense. But I think back in the hundreds of years between when Psalms was actually, most of Psalms was actually put to paper or papyrus, and you got to Song of Solomon in the 2nd century, that those things were accumulated for a number of different reasons.
Oh, yes.
They were added for this reason and for that reason, and there was no overarching theological view that said this will show how big God is. Maybe the effect, but it wasn't the intent.
No, okay, point well taken. I agree.
But who ultimately decided which books would be chosen?
We'll disagree on that.
Yeah.
It's a mystery.
I don't think they would be there if God had not intended for us to read them. And I think a lot of what he says in the wisdom books is, I've given you a beautiful life. I've given you a beautiful place to live. Could you please take care of it? Enjoy one another, love me, follow my basic rules, and, you can prosper and you can live a long time and you can be happy. But the problem with human beings is that we have free will.
Yeah, and that happened all the
And
way.
we
through.
like to argue, and we like to think that we know better. And, it's, he's,
It's the old pride issue.
yes,
We think we're-
right.
I think that's a
Pride
great
goes before
summary.
the fall.
That's a beautiful summary. I wish you had written that down, because I think the way you laid it out is exactly what the wisdom books were saying. It's a great summary, but yet, they're incomplete. I mean, we have the New Testament, we have Jesus Christ, so we have a much fuller understanding up to a point
Because Jesus
Of
had
God,
to come and
that they didn't
explain more
have
to
when
us.
these were written,
Right.
I mean, there's not much here about the afterlife, really, as we discussed, other than some vague,
Right.
dark existence.
That's
And
never been a strong part of the Jewish
Jewish
tradition.
faith.
Yeah.
It's not. It really isn't.
Well, when did they get the Pharisees and Sadducees?
Somewhere around 200 BC, they began to get that way.
Yeah, you
The
begin to develop
Pharisees
parties.
developed a view of some sort of post resurrection. The Sadducees never did.
Right.
Right. That's why they're Sadducees.
That's-
That's Bill Spengler.
You get the valedictorian award for this class.
Yeah.
It's really good.
That would be something Bill would say.
Yes, it is. It's exactly what he would say.
Right. Okay, but it also, I mean, it reward and punishment, I think, from these books is in this lifetime, pretty much, right? God rewards good behavior and he punishes bad behavior. And I don't believe we today believe that, when things go bad, it's punishment from God. I mean, it could be, some of it could be, maybe we've misused our free will, but this was a different understanding of things.
And the
back
Jewish
then.
resurrection was at the end of time.
Right.
Mhm.
And that's when it happened.
Certainly in the first century AD, there was a
Right.
view. I don't know what their view is
No, I
today.
don't either. I don't track it.
There are probably lots of views. I mean,
Right, just like
Because
Well,
the
and
Jewish-
particularly
Orthodox.
Yeah, and
They
particularly
track
the
different
inevitable
ways.
influence of being,
Yeah.
Jews for Jesus, which I've never understood.
yeah. Well, and apparently there's a move afoot even in Israel where some people are beginning to recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Jews, they're still Jews.
Right.
I mean, it's just,
Mm.
you can't avoid the interaction and the effect on each other.
It's as complex a religion as Christianity is.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Yes.
Remember, Christ was a Jew.
Yes, we forget that.
Yeah.
Especially in our paintings.
Yes. And they want to make him blonde and.
Yes.
Okay, other thoughts? How about out in the Zoom world? We haven't heard from you guys tonight. What are you thinking?
I kind of, I agree, and from the time we were doing them with the way Karen expressed it, I think the Psalms, for the very, reason they touch all parts of our lives and any situation that can arise. I think for many, Job is very relatable. And I like Proverbs also. I think Proverbs has very good lessons in Proverbs. And I kind of think, I know our son especially also likes Proverbs. I think the younger people, these are very concise and easy to understand words in many of them.
Good point.
Although they conflict sometimes.
But all of it's about life in this life on earth, where in Job, we see God, loving God coexisting with evil and suffering. But in the end, if you keep your faith, things work out. And then in Psalms, it touches every aspect of life. I mean, we find joy and we can draw strength. I mean, when you can't go to a funeral service and not hear the 23rd Psalm and say this applies not just to death, but every day. And it's there for us to draw strength from. And then, like Lois says, Proverbs, there's so many practical things in there that we can, and I think our son likes it so much because he has two sons. And it's the father son, if my son would just listen and take heed the direction you can get from Proverbs. But yet, despite all this, in Ecclesiastes, it's kind of depressing. Life is complicated and meaningless. Rather extreme. It's just some bouncing around here between these five, but all are parts of life as we live it today. And then in Song of Songs or Song of Solomon, we bring in some of the physical aspects and love, and that love is good. And that's nice to have that affirmation. So it's an interesting group of 5 books, all about giving hints about how to live our lives in the here and now, and gives us a perspective as we go into the New Testament and read what Christ had to say.
Well, even Ecclesiastes, I mean, we kind of mocked that book last week, but it does reflect, I think, a certain experience that a lot of people go through. in their faith journey, right? I mean, there are times when things happen and we can't understand it. We say, where is God? What, is he really there? Does he really know me? Does he care about me? I mean, these are natural questions that we ask that are expressed in there, and they're also in Job in kind of a similar fashion. But, you know, in both books, Job and Ecclesiastes, the authors never gave up on God. They had
Right.
faith to the very end. They never gave up. And I think that's an important message. You know, you hear a lot of people will say, oh yeah, I tried religion once, but it didn't really work for me. So I really don't believe in anything anymore, you know? And that's a really sad story.
Well, bad things can happen to good people and good things can happen to bad people. And if we get hung up on that and lose our faith, we've not done ourselves any, a good deed there.
That happens to people.
It does.
And I had a thought when Bob brought up earlier about the love relationships and thinking not about adults. And it made me just think of how young Mary and Joseph were. We keep going back to the fact that how at the time, in the culture of the time, how different things were than as the years progressed. I mean, we've got 900-year-old couples, and then we've got 13, 14, year old. Mary supposedly was very young.
Okay, well, this wraps up the series on wisdom books.
Let's say one thing about the next one.
Yes, please.
The bulletin has the classes on fall starting on 6 January, but we're going to start them at 4 rather than 5 to allow for the darkness and for people to drive each day.
Bad weather, maybe.
And so what it says in the bulletin is fine, except they'll start at 4. And I'll get Laura to change the bulletin to say 4 next week.
Thank you, Pete.
Great. Okay, prayer requests.
I think Doug Sherborne, the loss of Jan, was such a shock and such a surprise to all of us, but I can only imagine what he's going through. I think we need to keep him in prayer. And I think Reggie has to do entirely too many funeral celebrations of life services, whatever they want to call them. We have just lost too many people. And I can't believe I was looking at a curmudgeon list, 5 curmudgeons this year.
Wow.
It's amazing. 7 in the last 2 years, 9 in the last 3 years. It's really hard to fathom. But anyway, Reggie's the interface with all these people.
He
And
does
they're
a great
relatives.
job.
Yes.
He's
But
the
it
best
takes a
I
lot
think
out
I've
of it,
ever
for
heard.
sure.
And so many times you go to a funeral and it's very impersonal, you don't really feel like you get a sense of who the person was. And boy, he does make it a celebration of life. He's very good at
I'm
that.
sure at the end of the day, he thinks, this is not why I became a minister.
Yeah, to do something.
He did,
But he does a great job.
he did a real nice job with Dayton. So.
If he doesn't know the person, he seeks out the
Yes,
family to
right.
learn about the person because he wants it to be personal. And
Exactly.
you're right, he does a great job, but I'm sure it takes a lot out
Oh,
of
sure
him to
it
do it.
must. Yeah, it must. It's hard.
Crystal Kepler's mother, who's back in the hospital.
Yes, she should be in prayer, please.
Yeah, well, with regard to Reggie, he has said how much an emotional toll it does take on him, and he just can't do them every week. It's just too much.
Right.
So for sure.
We should probably space out our dying better.
Don't become a curmudgeon, it'll kill you.
That's what he kept trying not to.
We do have a date.
Is that why we don't see you, Pete?
Yeah,
Here.
it's the
All
right,
pathways
Sherry.
15.
Sherry has the
Oh.
floor.
She's
If she
trying
can
to
talk.
talk.
We do have a date for Jan's service, though. It's on.
For what, sorry?
Jan Sherburne's funeral.
service.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's January 15th at 2 o'clock. And in the morning, we're having 2 that day.
Geez.
In the morning is June Carter's service. So, but I think that's a private family, small service.
Laryngitis.
Okay, other prayer concerns?
Dan Clayton's father.
He is, what's up with him?
Oh, he's got multiple cancers.
Oh,
He's
okay.
in bad shape.
They are flying out to Seattle, hoping that Dan's dad and mom can meet them. They are from Alaska to spend Christmas.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
They live in Alaska.
Anchorage.
Let me go ahead and I'll start, and then at the end, as this is our last class, if we could all just join together in the Lord's Prayer. So, dear Holy Father, we thank you for your word, scripture that you've given us. Some of it is hard, it's difficult, but you help us to understand it by bringing together groups like this and speaking through us to each other. We're thankful for your scripture. We're thankful for your love, your compassion, for your creation, for your constant presence in our lives. Lord, there are some people who are in special need of healing and help right now. So we remember Doug Sherborne and the loss of Jan, and just pray for peace and comfort for Doug and the family. We also pray for the family of June Carter. We ask blessings of health on Crystal Kepley's mother, and on Dan Clayton's father. Lord, we also lift up our pastors here who have undoubtedly a very hard job that takes a certain emotional toll on them as they deal with the hardest issues of life and death. And so we just pray for, especially for Reggie, that you will give him spiritual and emotional strength and wisdom as he leads our congregation and continues to celebrate the lives of those who have been lost. So Lord, again, we give thanks and praise, and we look forward to coming back in January with another series. We just thank you for your word, and we close in the prayer that your son taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven,
Art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
thy kingdom
Come,
thy
thy
will
will
be
be
done.
done.
on
On
earth
earth
as
as it is in heaven.
Give us
Give us
this
this
day
day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil.
For thine
Thine
is
is
the
the
kingdom,
kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever.
Amen. All right, thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
At Zoom Lord's Prayer.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you,
Steve,
Steve.
Steve, you did a wonderful job of sometimes flying at 10,000 feet where we could see the whole picture, and then going down to tree level, we could see the leaves and the veins. So it was a really good way of doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, appreciate it.
Bob for setting it up, and all of you for.
Guys, later.
All right.
I'm gonna end the meeting.
Good night.